Hi, my name is Terry Doherty. I am the designer of the Glory and Empire series by Lock and Load Publishing. In this video, we'll go over how to move units for the 3 rule sets. We'll first take a look at some of the charts, and then we'll move to the tabletop to move some pieces around. The first thing to note is a unit's movement allowance is not printed on the counter. Instead, it is shown on the movement rate chart and varies according to the type of unit. The chart shows 3 movement rates for each unit type. A unit's movement allowance is reduced when it is out of command. In the battalion and brigade game, units can force march at the risk of disordering. They cannot do this in the soldiers game. For example, a French infantry unit has a normal movement allowance of 7, just 4 when it is out of command, or it can force march up to 5 more movement points. Okay, so here we have a French brigade. It's all lined up in a nice long line, and it's going to wheel and try and engage the British troops on the left. So we'll show the basic movement for the 3 different rule sets for the soldiers game, the battalion game, and the brigade game, so that you can kind of see the differences in movement between the 3 sets. So the soldiers and battalion game rules do not require units to be in nice, long, neat lines like this, but it is important for units to protect their flanks. So the normal movement allowance of French infantry is 7 movement points. So in the soldiers game, I guess we'll go ahead and move the outer unit first. So it's going to go 1 movement point, 2, 3. Then it's going to move down the contour, which going down 1 contour is 0. So that's 4, 5, 6, and 7. And it'll change facing there. And in the soldiers and battalion game, there's no cost for units to change facing. Then we'll go down the next one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Change facing. 1, 2, 3. It can either go through the woods, change into formation, into column to go through the woods, or go around. It's probably less expensive to go around, so we'll do that. So that was 3, 4, 5, 6. And here, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. And 1, and this one just rotates in place. So we've basically done a wheel in the soldiers game, and so with the soldiers game there's no disorder checks or anything like that, so it's all quite simple and nothing extra to do. We're just ready to charge forward and go to guns. So we'll reset here and then do the battalion game. So now we've reset our French line of battle, and they're going to go through the wheel, and we'll start on the outside again. So if they wheel all the way around, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for the battalion game, because again, changing facing doesn't cost movement points. However, in the battalion game, disorder checks are required. So if units are in line formation and they march more than 4 movement points in a single phase, then they have to roll a disorder check and subtract 5 for each hex or for each movement point over 4 that they've expended. So in this case, it's expended 7 movement points. So that's 3 over, so that's minus 15. So you grab the dice and roll there, and we rolled a 37, so which his morale is 35, so that would place him in disorder. So he's marked with a disorder marker, and then we move on to the next unit, which has a similar path. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's gone 2 over, so again you roll the dice. And another 35, so that's a second disorder. And now for the third unit, as he goes, he's going to march around the woods again. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to change facing. So he cost him a little bit extra than just wheeling straight around to go around the woods. If he could have changed formation, he could have gone through the woods, but he'd have to change formation to column and then back to line, which would again trigger disorder checks. So he rolls a 92, so he's good. Now the next guy is 1, 2, 3, 4, so he doesn't have to take a disorder check. The next guy moves 3, 2, 1, and 0. So now the whole line is wheeled, and the 2 outside units have failed their disorder checks. An alternative is that they potentially lag behind, so they could have stayed, back 3 hexes to avoid the cost, and then catch up with the brigade on the following turn. But of course, that leaves them a little bit out of position and potentially vulnerable to a counterattack by the British while they're waiting. So in the brigade game, it's similar to the battalion game as far as the actual movement of the individual pieces. So one of the differences is for a wheel like this, it will be a line of battle change of front by wheeling, which is shown in our pretty diagrams over here. And we're doing a forward wheel, so that's an ordinary evolution, so the modifier for that will be 0 on the evolution check chart. So anytime a line of battle changes facing, that's going to have to trigger one of these evolutions that's listed on this chart here in order to change front. So in the battalion game, or in the brigade game, excuse me, it works out the same. We end up with 7 movement points, 7 movement points, 7 movement points, or excuse me, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And again, the units on the outer side have to take disorder checks because they march too far. But first, we take our evolution check. So the evolution check, we have to roll less than 2, or greater than 2, excuse me, in order to pass. So we rolled a 7, so they pass. If they had failed, we would immediately take disorder checks for all of the units in the evolution, in the brigade for that evolution. And in addition to that, the units on the outside would have to, that march too far in line, would also have to take disorder checks. So they would potentially take 2 disorder checks if the evolution failed. So one additional thing that's different about the brigade game movement is how it conducts its move in segments. So in the grand tactical formations, the units are sort of treated like a single large formation that occupies multiple hexes. So first we'll show a wheel and then advance in the soldiers and battalion games. So in the soldiers and battalion games, each unit does its wheel, does its independent movement. So it's +1 to go up the contour. So that's 2, 3, 4. So that's no extra movement points for him. And he does his wheel in 1, 2, 3, 4. And he does his wheel in 1, 2, 3, 4. And he does his wheel 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5. So the one on the outside there would have to take a disorder check. And so let's assume they all have assault markers. So normally in this game, if you don't have an assault or charge marker, you cannot enter a zone of control without taking a morale check. And that's primarily because they didn't enter musket range unless they absolutely had to, because it was deadly and they really didn't want to waste their troops in indecisive firefights until they were ready for a decisive action like an assault or charge. So now we're reset. So in the brigade game, we'd go ahead and do our wheel first. So this guy would change facing in place. That guy would march out 1. He'd march out 2 and change face, and he would march out 3 and change face. So in the brigade game, an evolution also costs an additional 1 MP, which is for time for leaders and guides to get into their proper positions and potentially send any messengers that might be needed to convey the evolution that's about to occur. So all the units now have spent 4 movement points. So the inner one only spent 0, 1, 2, 3, plus the 1 MP for the evolution. But these guys are basically sitting there marking time, waiting for the units on the outside of the wheel to get into position. So they're all considered to have spent 4 MP total at that point for the purposes of their movement allowance for the turn, but not for counting disorder checks. So now we conduct the next segment of the move. So in this case, if we were going to launch assaults, we'd go ahead and do that. I guess first they would take their evolution check, and they roll a 7 again, so they pass. So then for the next segment of the move, they would move 2 MP, 2 MP, 3, and 3. And let's assume they all have assault markers because they're going in for the kill here. So the total MP cost for the troops on the outside would have been 6 MP, and the total MP cost for the ones on the inside for purpose of disorder checks would be only 4 and 3 respectively. So the 2 on the outside would have to take a disorder check at that point, and that would conclude their movement for the phase. So we'll cover a little more on disorder checks. Disorder checks apply to the battalion and brigade game only. They do not apply to the soldiers game. A disorder check is a check against a unit's morale rating and is handled just like a normal morale check. The disorder check events chart shows a reminder of the list of actions that require disorder checks. Items in rosy red apply only to the brigade game. Units take disorder checks when they move through difficult terrain, when they march too far, too fast in a particular formation, or if they force march, or when they want to change facing or formation as a reaction to enemy movement. The brigade game adds a bunch more actions. The Move Disorder Check events chart shows the details of the specific events and their die roll modifiers. All modifiers are cumulative and may be applied more than once in a phase. For example, a unit that changes formation twice and crosses 2 hex-side obstacles would subtract -10 for the second formation change and -10 for each hex-side obstacle crossed, for a total modifier of -30. And finally, the reaction formation change disorder check chart shows the die roll modifiers for various conditions when a unit reacting to enemy actions takes a disorder check. You can see that deploying many skirmishers can have an adverse impact on the ability to successfully react, and making the attempt when the enemy unit is closer is more difficult. That's all for movement and disorder checks. I hope you enjoyed this video.